Well, good morning. Before we get into the message today, I just wanted to remind you that there's something really exciting happening next Sunday. Next Sunday is our very first Sunday as one church in two locations on Sunday. So it's exciting. God has been doing something really incredible at Rise Church. Our services have been full. As you can see, our kids' classrooms are packed out, and we've been running 4 services on Sundays just to make room for everyone. And while that's a great problem to have, we just knew that it was time to make more room for people to encounter Jesus and not be so crowded. And so next Sunday, we launch our South Campus. And I just want to say personally a huge thank you to the army of people here at Rise Church who have volunteered and served and helped renovate and given financially, and then especially to those of you in the room who have committed to go attend at the South Campus starting next Sunday. We needed you to do that, and you rose to that occasion, so thank you. Your willingness to step up is what's making this possible. And if you were one of the people that committed to attend South Campus, this is your reminder, that's next Sunday. Don't come here. Some of you are going to make it halfway here and, and turn around and go back over there. But we need you there welcoming the church family from day one. So remember, next Sunday we have 3 services here, 8:30, 10, and 11:30. And then over there we have 9 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. When you walked in today, you were handed a little card. That's a little invite card. It has both campuses' information on it with the times, so you don't forget them. You can put that on your fridge at home or whatever. Or you can use it to actually invite somebody that you've been wanting to invite to Rise for a while, because for the first time in a while, next Sunday there will be open seats in all the services because we're going to spread out. And so that's just an exciting thing. And just remember, we've said this many times, I'm going to say it again. We are not a church that is adding this location just for the sake of it. We're doing this because there was a real need, and we saw the need, and this is the solution that God gave us, and so we're making room for more people to encounter Jesus Christ. And I also believe that we're stepping into one of the most exciting seasons of our church. So I hope that you're there for it. I'm there for it. One church, 2 locations, same mission. And we can't wait to see what God's going to do. If you're just joining us, we are in the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, and we've been journeying through it for the last however long. And today we're going to be in Mark chapter 8. If you want to open up your Bible to chapter 8, or you can open it up in your Rise app. The notes are there too. And I'll just say up front, I've really been loving this series. I feel like there's just been a lot of really good stuff coming out of the Gospel of Mark that we can apply to our lives. But today, if you've been with us the whole time, this is the big day. This is the day where we get to the top of the mountain. This is chapter 8. It's right smack at the center of the Gospel of Mark. That's where we're at today. We've been building up to this point. And if you've been with us the whole series, then you know that halfway through the book is where we are now. We've reached the top of the mountain. We've been climbing for weeks, and today we stand at the peak. And so for the last however many weeks, we've been climbing that mountain through chapters 1 through 8, and we've been seeing Jesus reveal different aspects of who he is. He's been revealing different aspects of his character and his attributes, and he's been stacking victory on victory on victory. He's been showing that he has all the authority in heaven and on earth. All authority belongs to him. He's been doing miracles, he's been teaching, everybody's been watching, and again, the Gospel of Mark has a plan, it has a purpose, it has an agenda, and that agenda is that on the way up, we're going to start answering that question that everybody needs to ask. Who is Jesus really? It's a question that they needed to know back then the answer to. It's a question that we need to know the answer to today, and today, Mark brings us to the moment where that question has to be answered. Now, before I read this passage to you, I want to say something up front. There are sections in this passage I'm about to read that could be a whole sermon all by themselves. And we're going to go through them, but Mark doesn't slow down. In classic Mark fashion, he stacks one moment on top of the next. It's almost like he's given us Christianity 101, 201, and 301 all in this passage in rapid succession. So let me read it to you, and then we'll unpack it together, okay? Mark chapter 8, we're going to start in verse 27. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" So that's who other people say that I am, but Here's what I really want to know. Who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. Verse 31, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Some big words in there. And I'll be honest with you, when I read this passage quite a few times over the last few weeks, I got a little intimidated by it because there's just so much in there that I just read. And there's so many different things we could address. You have Peter's confession. You have, right after that, Jesus rebuking Peter. And then you have Jesus calling the people to pick up their own cross and follow him, which would have been new to them. And then each of those moments, I mean, it could have been its own message. There's a lot here, but Mark, when he writes this, he doesn't separate them, and I think he does that very intentionally. He stacks them together almost like a row of dominoes, each one building towards something bigger. And remember, the Gospel of Mark has a purpose. It has a plan. It's going in a certain direction. It has an agenda as he's written it. He's writing with a purpose. And his goal in writing the Gospel of Mark is to reach this moment in the story that I just read you, where the people would actually be able to answer the question, not just the people in the story, but the people reading these words later, who is Jesus really? And every person who encounters Jesus has to come to a conclusion on the answer to that question. And if you remember weeks and weeks ago, we talked about how C.S. Lewis said there's really only 3 conclusions you can come to if you've really done the work, if you've really looked at the evidence for who Jesus claimed to be and who he is. You can't just say that he was a good moral teacher, like a lot of people around us are saying right now, because he actually claimed to be Lord, and we have documents of that. You can't just say that. A good moral teacher would not have claimed to be the Lord unless he was telling the truth. He would be a liar. He could be a lunatic. That's another conclusion you could draw, because maybe somebody who wasn't the Lord would say that if they were a lunatic. But you have to draw a conclusion, and you can only come to one of those 3. The third one, of course, which is the right answer, by the way, I happen to know, is that he is, in fact, the Lord himself. But everybody needs to answer that question. Everybody needs to come to a conclusion. Everybody needs to answer this, maybe the most important question anybody on this earth will ever answer: who is Jesus? Quick side note for anyone who missed week 1. Mark, also known as John Mark, he's writing this book, this gospel, based on the testimony of Peter. We talked about that in week 1. And so in many ways, what we're reading here are Peter's memories of his time with Jesus being written down by Mark. And Peter remembers this particular moment very clearly with the detail that he actually shares here. So Jesus takes his disciples, here's what's happening here, to this place up north called Caesarea Philippi. Geographically, it's the furthest north that Jesus would travel in the Gospels, but it's also a place that was known for something else. It's a place that was known for pagan worship. And so back then when he arrived there, you would have found temples to pagan gods. The people there literally would have been worshiping the Greek goat god Pan. So imagine the scene. There's idols, there's pagan temples, there's false worship happening everywhere of false gods. And right there in the middle of this place, in the middle of all of that, Jesus turns to his disciples. I think that's interesting. And he asks a question. He says, first, who do people say that I am? What are you hearing? What have you heard? But then he makes it personal. He looks them directly in the eye and he asks, but who do you say that I am? That's what they say, but you've been walking with me for a while. You claim to know me. You've heard my words. You've seen what I've done who do you say that I am? And so that brings us to the first thing that Jesus reveals here in this passage that we just read, and he reveals some very important things. The first thing he reveals to them and to us as we're reading it later is he clearly reveals his true identity. That Jesus, in fact, is the Lord. Let's look at it again, line by line. So verse 27 says, "And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that I am?' Verse 28 says, and they told him." So here's the rumor of the day, Jesus. This is what we're going to tell you. This is what people are saying about you. Some say you're John the Baptist. Others say you're Elijah. Now remember, Elijah was probably one of the most famous Old Testament prophets. He performed miracles. He even raised a guy from the dead. So people are looking at Jesus and saying, well, he's doing some stuff like that's that amazing. Maybe he's Elijah coming back. But the point is, the crowds knew that there was something special about Jesus. There was something unique here. There was something going on here that was out of this world. But then Jesus makes the question personal, and he says, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers this way. He says, "Well, you are the Christ." Write that down. He is the Christ. The Christ, by the way. That's important verbiage there, and I'm going to tell you why. Because here we are 2,000 years later, and sometimes I think we miss how big this moment was when it was happening. I don't know if you grew up this way. It's kind of silly to admit now, but when I was a young boy, I remember hearing about Jesus Christ, and I just thought that Christ was his last name. Because, I mean, even at school, he's in the history books, he's just called Jesus Christ. So obviously, he was this boy that was born, to Joseph and Mary Christ. Like, that's his last name, right? But the more you study it, you realize, no, that's how it sounds sometimes, but Christ is not actually his last name. Christ is a title. And it literally means the anointed one. It literally means the Messiah. It means the Savior. It means the one that had been prophesied to come centuries before he walked the earth. And all of those prophecies being fulfilled by this man who's now walking the earth. Who is Jesus? He's the Christ. 2,000 years later, when you read about him in the history books, he's still called Jesus, and people don't even realize this who write the books sometimes, the Christ. That by saying his name, we know him as now. They're literally saying out loud, Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the Messiah. That's what they're saying. You're the Messiah, Peter says. You're the one that we've been waiting for. You're the one that our parents told us about at the dinner table every night that would come one day. You're the ones that our grandparents have been praying for. You're the one that the rabbis taught us about at the temple. You are the Christ. So in this moment, this is huge. It's like, boom, Peter gets it right. Matthew's gospel tells us that when Peter says this, Jesus actually responds to him out loud. He says, "Blessed are you, Peter, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. My Father in heaven revealed this to you." In other words, this wasn't your earthly father who revealed this to you. The heavenly Father revealed this to you. Peter didn't just guess correctly. In other words, as he was taking stabs at this, God opened his eyes. And this moment right here, this is what we've been building toward. This is the center of the Gospel of Mark. This is the peak of the mountain. Some of you remember what we talked about in week 1, how the Gospel of Mark is structured like this, like a mountain. And the whole time you're climbing the face of the mountain all the way up to chapter 8, which is where we are now, Jesus is revealing things about himself. He's stacking all those victories. He's healing people. He's performing miracles. He's teaching. He's casting out demons, calming the storms, forgiving sins. And again, Mark has been showing us Jesus has all the authority in heaven and earth. He has all the power. He's not just a good teacher. He's not just a moral figure in history. He's actually God in the flesh. And that's what it's building to up the mountain to this moment in chapter 8, where now we finally here in this place of pagan worship, Jesus says, "Okay, who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers correctly, "You are the Christ." This is the crescendo of the first half of the gospel. But something happens next, something that would have shocked everybody in that moment that were standing around. It's the twist in the story. It's like the big reveal. You guys like big reveals? Like you watch those shows that have the, like I don't want to admit this, but I grew up in a generation where when you wanted to see the next episode of your favorite TV show, you had to wait 7 days. You guys remember that? And if you missed the episode, you couldn't go catch up. Like it was just gone. You'd have to ask somebody that saw it unless you taped it. You guys remember tapes? Some of you have no idea what we're talking about, but there were these things called, we'll talk about it later. But my kids don't understand this. Like a few weeks ago, we were watching the Super Bowl live, and they were like, what are these things that keep coming up? These are commercials, son. Like they don't get that. It's like, why can't we just skip it? Because it's live television, you know? And I said, see, back in the 1900s, you had to wait a full week before you could watch the big reveal. Like they leave the cliffhanger and then you gotta like watch the time until the next week when you see what actually happens next in the story. Today we just binge watch entire series on a lazy Saturday. There's no big reveal. It's like we just get to see it all at once, which is kind of like the Bible. We have the whole Bible, but back then they didn't have all of the story yet like we do. So there was this big reveal. There was this like, they were waiting for this. They didn't know what was going to happen. And every good story has something in common, and that's how this happened. But this reveal, right here in this text, we get a reveal that is bigger than anything we've ever seen on the screen or read in a book. Because Peter says, you are the Christ. And Jesus said, you're right. That's exactly who I am. That's exactly who I am. And Peter and the disciples, this is the moment in the story where they needed to know at this point because of what was going to happen next. Because now, starting next week, we're going to go down the mountain. And the story shifts. And things start to look a little different. And things even start to feel a little darker. And there's some big things, some big moments that happen all the way to the cross and Easter Sunday, which is coming. But this is that part in the story. And so you and I, 2,000 years later, we also need to know, just like they needed to know back then. This is part of why Jesus was sharing this with them. You can't follow Jesus until you first recognize who he really is. Otherwise, you're not following the real Jesus. And what happens next in this part of the story blows the disciples' mind, because they expected the Christ that had been prophesied to come. They'd learned all about him. They heard about him. They've read about him, but he hadn't come yet. They expected that the Messiah was going to come and ascend to a throne, that he was going to be an earthly king. They were anticipating that the expected Messiah was going to come and overthrow the oppressive regime of Rome. They expected political power and military victory and restoration of their nation, but instead, what actually happened is the moment that Jesus is revealed as the Christ, he begins walking a path towards suffering on a cross. That's not what they wanted. That's not the type of king that they were expecting. He starts this path not down the mountain now, we're going to start seeing next week, toward the cross where he's going to suffer humiliation. It's a path toward suffering, a path toward rejection, a path toward death. And that twist in the story for them, we have the whole story. We see the joy at the end, but the twist in the story for them was so shocking that Peter just couldn't handle it. He loved Jesus. And so this is kind of leading to what happens next, where Jesus reveals not only his true identity, but now he's going to reveal to them his true mission, because they didn't understand it yet. You are the Christ, he gets it right, but immediately after that moment, Jesus reveals something that's just as important. Not just his identity, but his mission. Look at verse 31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And then verse 32 says something that's really important. Don't miss this little line. And he said this plainly. He said this plainly. In other words, Jesus is not speaking in parables here. He's not beating around the bush here. He's not being mysterious. He's telling them clearly, plainly, directly to their faces, I am going to suffer. I am going to die. I am going to suffer humiliation. I am going to rise from the dead 3 days later. He's making it plain. Now watch what Peter does. So this is the same Peter who just got the right answer. The same Peter who just declared, you are the Christ. Verse 32 says, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. In other words, Peter says, no, Jesus, that's not how this story's supposed to go. That's not how this ends. You're not going to go through that. And then Jesus turns and rebukes Peter, just like that. Verse 33, get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. I read that part one time to one of our students here at the church, and I never thought about it this way, but he said, wait, Jesus called Peter Satan? Is that a sin? And that was a really interesting question. And my answer was, no, it's not a sin. Jesus had never sinned. He was sinless. And then I took it down a different path and I said, actually, bud, when something is said absolutely correctly, where what is said is absolutely true and it's said in the correct way, it's never sinful to say it, even if it stings or makes somebody uncomfortable. And Jesus knew how to do it, not just say what was always correct, but say it in the correct way. Jesus never sinned, even in this moment. So Jesus is correcting Peter here because he needed to be corrected and because he loves him, because Peter is still thinking, he's thinking like a human being. See, Peter is thinking about earthly victory. Jesus is thinking about eternal victory. It's not the same thing. All these people were expecting the Savior of the world to come, the coming King to come, the Messiah, the Christ to come, and just achieve earthly victory for them in all the ways on their list that they thought earthly victory should be achieved against the oppressors, against evil, justice, all this stuff. And instead, Jesus was thinking about eternal victory and what that was actually going to look like. And Mark puts these two moments in this passage right next to each other side by side, and I think he does it intentionally, Peter getting it right and Peter getting it wrong. I think because Mark wants us to know, even 2,000 years later, you can get this part completely right and get the part right next to it completely wrong at the same time. That's a really important thing for us to think through as Christians, because we can fill our churches with people who say and believe with everything in them, Jesus is the Christ. And in the very next breath, they completely miss the very mission of Christ and don't live it out. You can say out loud, Jesus is the Christ, and completely miss the mission of Christ. You can believe the right thing and completely get this part wrong. Because Jesus, in truth, he didn't come to be served, he came to serve. He came to give his life, it says, as a ransom for many. And see, the disciples, they expected the Messiah to march straight to the throne. That's what they wanted. They thought Jesus would overthrow Rome and the tyranny and the oppression, establish Israel, become a political king like David, but Jesus came to overthrow far greater than Rome. He came to overthrow sin. He came to overthrow death and evil and darkness, and he came to crush the power of Satan himself. And he would do it at the cross, not from an earthly throne. Not from a place of political power, but from dying and suffering and giving up his life as a ransom for many. And not just for Israel either, by the way, but for all of humanity. And we have to see, as Christians, we have to get to the point where we get how critical the cross is to the gospel. Like it's everything. Because if God is truly holy, then that means that God must also be perfectly just. We love to talk about God's grace and God's love. We love to talk about how God took me exactly as I was with all my muck and all my sin and all my past mistakes, and he took me right in that moment, just right as we love to talk about that, and that's all true. But too many people these days are not willing to talk about the other truth of it, which is, we celebrate his grace, we sing the songs of his mercy, but we also have to remember, just as God is perfectly holy, he's at the same time perfectly just. Every sin had to be paid for. Every act of rebellion had to be accounted for. That's why Jesus had to come. He stepped out of heaven, he took on human flesh, and before he became the conquering king, he had to become the suffering servant. You may have heard Mark's gospel talked about in this way before, but Mark's gospel is the one that lays out really vividly in the next chapters we're about to go through how Jesus is our suffering servant. And on the cross, he absorbed all that we deserved, that he did not. And I want you to hear this today. If you haven't come to a place where you've realized the reason I had to come to Christ, the reason I needed Jesus to save me, or I still do, is because I have a debt that I could never repay, no matter how hard I tried, how good I was, how well I performed. There would be no way to balance those books on my own. I need Jesus to do it. Then you haven't come to really understand the true mission of Christ. because you cannot perform your way into it. You can't believe your way in. You can't do enough good to counteract. None of us deserve the grace that he's offered us as a free gift. That's the gospel. But the truth is he offers it to us, and that's grace. That's his amazing grace. See, Jesus didn't die theoretically. He died literally, historically, physically, and personally. Because we have real sin that must be forgiven, and humanity needs real salvation, and he's the only one that could bring it. And Peter couldn't understand that yet at this part of the story. He thought Jesus was just going to keep stacking up those victories like we've been seeing in the first 8 chapters. Miracle after miracle, crowds gathering, Rome's going to fall, Israel's going to rise. Jesus had a greater mission, though. He had this true mission, the mission that led him to the cross, where he defeated sin, evil, death, and Satan himself. He bound the strong man. And that is the good news that we sing about. That's the gospel that we preach. And here's the beautiful part of the story. Jesus said yes to humiliation. And because he said yes to the cross and the suffering and the pain, 3 days later he walked out of the grave. And we're going to celebrate the resurrection soon on Easter Sunday at both campuses. And it's the resurrection of Christ the King, the one who sets us free. So after Jesus reveals his true identity, after he reveals his true mission, which we're about to read the rest of in the rest of the gospel as he heads toward the cross, as we head toward Good Friday and Easter, he now reveals the true cost of discipleship. And we're going to spend a few minutes on this one because this is something that we all need to see in this part of the story. We've seen his identity now. We've seen his mission. Make no mistake about it, that was his mission. But now he's going to show us and explain the true cost of following him and what that looks like practically. So again, Peter correctly identifies who Jesus is. Then Jesus explains that the Christ must go suffer, must serve, must go to the cross. And then Jesus turns to his disciples and to us, and he says this. He says, if you really want to follow me, I'm summarizing, it's going to cost you something. Look at verse 34. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, Jesus said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I'm going to pause here for a moment and just be honest with you. I don't naturally love the idea of denying myself. I don't naturally lean toward this. I don't think anybody does. I like comforting myself, satisfying myself. I like things to go my way, according to my preference. I like to be comfortable. I mean, don't you? Isn't that the world we live in? It's just built into us. I mean, I like restaurants that fit my taste perfectly. I like the world to be customized to me. I like convenience. I like everything to be safe and painless. But Jesus says, if we are going to follow him, we must deny ourselves. That's the first thing he says here. And then he gives us this list of statements. Let me take you through this list. He's explaining why this matters and what this looks like. For whoever would save his life, first you got to lose it. If you're not willing to lose your life, you won't gain it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Is it worth losing your soul to keep everything else? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father and the holy angels. Some intense words, but what Jesus is saying, he's making it clear. Following him comes at a cost. It comes at a cost. Now, I want to make something very clear lest somebody, especially new to the faith, gets confused. The Bible makes it very clear. Salvation is free. Okay? Salvation is free. It's a gift of grace. You can't earn it. You can't buy it. It can only be received, and it can only be received from Jesus. But once you receive it, once you say yes to following Jesus, your life will never fully belong to you again. That's what that means. And Jesus says that what that looks like is taking up a cross. So salvation is free, but following Jesus will cost you your life. Salvation's free, but discipleship costs everything. It's both and. And by the way, if you've come to that place I mentioned earlier where you really understand what's been given to you freely and you've received it that you did not deserve, the only reasonable response out of an abundance of gratitude for that grace is to pick up a cross and follow him, if you really get it. That's why I brought that up. And we have to be careful here too, because this cannot mean to us 2,000 years later what it didn't mean to the people back then. That's a principle of interpreting the Bible, by the way. If you want to get the right meaning when you're studying the Bible, it's not going to change and mean something different to us in our part of the world, in our time in history, than it meant to them. And so if you want to get the real meaning out of the Bible, that's why we talk about context around here a lot. You first have to understand what it meant to the people it was being originally spoken to or written to, and then we can bring it into today and apply it, but it's not going to change. That's how people misinterpret the Bible all the time. You got to know the context. And so when you're thinking about taking up your cross, I want you to hear this part. When Jesus told them to take up their cross and follow him, they didn't yet know that what he was saying was he was going to go to a cross. But they had seen a cross. So they knew what it meant to carry a cross. They had seen people carrying crosses through the streets. They had seen criminals to the Romans being put on crosses to their death. And so there were some different things that they knew about crosses. Like a cross meant death. It meant suffering. It meant public humiliation sometimes. Every time. And so if you had to summarize what it meant to carry a cross, it was a painful thing. Following Jesus will cost you something. Sometimes it will hurt, especially if you're doing it right. Carrying a cross is also personal. Nobody else can carry your cross for you. Everybody has to pick up their own if they're going to follow him. Your parents having carried their cross so well their whole life does not count as carrying your cross. You have to make the personal decision of whether you're going to really follow him or not by picking up your own. Carrying a cross would have also been seen back then as permanent. It wasn't a temporary thing. It wasn't a temporary lifestyle. It was a lifelong surrender daily. And then carrying a cross was very public. So another thing Jesus might have been saying here was, following me is not something that you hide or keep in the dark, but it's something that the people around you will notice and see if it's actually happening. And this whole idea of picking up the cross and carrying your cross to follow Jesus was very countercultural back then, by the way, especially in a Roman and Greek worldview that existed back then. In the Roman world, let me tell you what they valued. The whole culture, they valued glory, power, honor, strength. The definition of greatness was dominating others. That's what their culture knew. But when Jesus came, he introduced something that the ancient world had not seen before. He's the one that actually introduced this worldview that we still have today. He brought these things that people hadn't practiced or seen in these ways before: humility, service, sacrifice, charity, generosity. And he brought them in huge, world-changing ways. You know this idea that we have in our culture? We think it's like a Western idea, like servant leaders are the best leaders. And I agree with that, by the way. Servant leadership is where it's at, not domineering leadership. Like, that's a principle. That didn't originate in Western culture. It originated with Christ. He's the one that brought it. It didn't come from Rome. It came from Christ. And when Jesus lived this way and modeled it, and then when the Christians after his death and resurrection started to live this way and model it, it changed the world. Did you know that we have documents? You can still see some of them today. Historical records that talk about people that witnessed their first encounters with Christians after the resurrection of Christ and what they noticed in this different group of people that they had never seen before. I could do a whole 3 messages on this church history thing. If you guys don't know, Christians are the ones who changed the world. They're the ones who started the first hospitals. They're the ones that started the first schools. They're the ones that started the first orphanages that the world had ever seen. It all came from this motley crew of followers of Jesus who were picking up their cross, completely changing their view of the world and following him in a countercultural way. And it changed the world. We actually have historical records of this. I'm going to read you a few of them. In 125 AD, there was a philosopher named Aristides, and he wrote a letter to Emperor Hadrian, and he was describing this group of people he'd encountered called the Christians. Listen to what he said. We'll put it on the screen. They love one another. They never fail to help widows. They save orphans from those who would hurt them. If a man has something, he gives freely to the man who has nothing. If they see a stranger, they take him into their homes and treat him like a brother. This is truly a new kind of people. There's something divine about them. You keep reading the lines around that quote I put up here, you'll find that the context and the tone of this philosopher's writing to this emperor was surprise, like something they had not seen before. A shocking but beautiful thing he was witnessing among this new group of people. They just hadn't seen anything like it. These kinds of things, by the way, can be found all throughout tons of historical records. Christians who laid down their lives, Christians caring for widows, caring for orphans, giving generously, serving humbly. And by the way, it eventually changed the entire Roman Empire. Let me give you another example. There was a man from Ethiopia, and his original name he was known by was Moses the robber. And he was famous for theft and violence and crime. And eventually he had to flee into the desert to escape the consequences of his life. And while hiding in the Egyptian desert, he encountered the Christian church, some of whom were living out there in the desert. He met followers of Jesus. And as he writes, you learn that his life was completely transformed by this group of Christians. Moses the robber became a pastor. He became an early church father. And history remembers him now as Moses the Black, one of the earlier church fathers. And here's the words he wrote. He's talking to the Christians when he wrote this. He says, "You fast, but Satan doesn't eat. You labor fervently, but Satan never sleeps. The only way you can overcome Satan is by acquiring humility, for Satan has no humility." You know what he's saying there? He's saying, I'm watching this group of people. They're giving up food to hear from God and to learn what it's like to fully depend on him. Satan doesn't need to eat, and they're still winning. They're laboring fervently and not getting the rest they need because the mission is too important. Satan never sleeps, and yet they're still winning. And the thing that he noticed that they had that Satan clearly doesn't have is humility. What a weapon. A couple centuries later, another church leader named Gregory said this: "The cross is not punishment, it's the ladder to heaven." Because when people follow Jesus, rather than simply believing in him, and they take up their cross, it changes everything. That's when it changes hearts. That's when it changes entire cultures. That's when it changes the world. When Christians don't just believe, but they pick up their cross and follow him. When they deny themselves. When they give up their very life and realize it no longer belongs to me. It belongs to him. So I want you to consider something in the year 2026. In the world we're living in right now. We still live in a world where people are asking the same question that they were wrestling with 2,000 years ago. Who is Jesus really? And the answer to that question and where you go with it determines everything. So again, we've been spending the first 8 chapters building up to the answer to that question. Now we're going to spend the next 8 showing us what it looks like to actually do that. And when people ask that question today, who is Jesus really, you get all kinds of answers. I heard just this week from somebody, I love Jesus. He's one of my favorite teachers in all of history. This person doesn't believe he's the Lord. And she was using him to justify some things that she wanted to believe in that aren't true. People around you will say all kinds of things about Jesus, and some of them sound really positive. Just like back then. Some will say he was a prophet. Some will say he was just a historical figure. The question Jesus asked his disciples, though, is the same question that matters more today than the other question we've been asking. Because once you learn the question of who is Jesus really, then you still have to answer the question, who do you say he is? And do you say it out loud? And do you not just say it with your lips and your mind, but do you say it with your life? Have you settled that? Have you nailed that down? Have you confessed with your mouth, Jesus Christ, the Christ, is Lord? Because if he is the Christ, if he really did die on a cross for your sin, if he really did rise on the grave, that's where we're heading in this story, then he deserves more than your admiration. He deserves your life. He makes that very clear. And seeing Jesus clearly leads to following him completely. Once you see him clearly, it demands more of you. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. In other words, you don't just believe in Jesus, you follow him. You surrender. You lay down control. You trust him with everything. Your future, your decisions, your identity, your life, the areas of your life you haven't surrendered yet, the ones that are hard to give up on, the ones that maybe even feel wrong to you, but that's what he said, and so you trust him anyway. And I just want to say this really clearly. There could be people in the room, and I've been there in the past too, where you might believe the right things about Jesus, but if you're really breaking it down, you've never actually fully surrendered to him. You know the story, you know the theology, you know the songs, but you've never said, Jesus, you're not just the Savior, you're my Savior. You're my Lord. He's still asking the same question. Who do you say that I am? And again, if your answer is you are the Christ, your next step is simple. If I was going to boil it down into 2 words, it's your next step is follow him. Don't just believe in him, follow him. Not casually, not when it's convenient, but fully with your whole life, making him the center of every area. Because when Christ becomes the center of your life, that's when everything starts to change. I talk to a lot of Christians who believe all the right things, and they've even made the decision to follow Jesus in here. But they haven't surrendered every area of their life and put Jesus at every area of their life. And we all have those areas we could still come into, myself included. Jesus isn't at the center of this area. I need to put him at the center of this area. But that level of surrender is when things drastically begin to change. Here's the summary, if you want it in one line, the whole sermon. If Jesus is the Christ, then the cross is the mission, and the cost is, and discipleship is the cost. So I want to invite 2 groups of people in the room to respond in some way to Jesus. There could be a few of you in the room who, maybe you've never fully surrendered your life to Jesus. Like you believe in him, but you've never actually declared him as Lord. You can do that today. Today can be the day where you start living for him. Second, there are believers in the room, and I've been there too, where you know Jesus, and you were carrying a cross at one point, but at some moment, whatever happened, you laid the cross down, and now it's just sitting on the floor. Today could be the moment where instead of being comfortable for the rest of your life, you start living for him again, and you pick the cross back up and you follow him. Maybe it's time to get a few more splinters. Maybe it's time to feel a little more weight. Maybe it's time to realize that following Jesus is not always comfortable. So if that's you and you need to surrender to Christ in any of those ways, or if you need to recommit your life to following him, I just want to invite you to do that today. You can do it in your heart. You can do it with one of our prayer team members who are going to be up here. You can come find one of us afterward, but don't hesitate. If he is the Christ, then that means he's worth everything. Today, it seems like a lot of people believe this, but Jesus didn't come to collect admirers. He came to collect disciples, followers. And you can admire Jesus your whole life and never actually follow him. So today, not tomorrow, today, I just want to challenge you with everything in me. Decide who he is. Is he that to you? And then follow him. If you've already decided who he is, maybe your next step is to publicly declare him, which, by the way, is what we call baptism. We're going to do that in a couple weeks, where people will enter the water. You've seen it here many times. We do it every month. People enter the water, and that's what they're doing. They are publicly declaring that he is Lord of their life. Which isn't just for them either, by the way. I can't tell you how many people through that public declaration have stepped through these doors because they wanted to support their friend or their family member who was going to be doing this, who wouldn't have been here otherwise. And those individuals end up surrendering to Christ as well because of their public declaration. Jesus made a promise that if you live an unashamed life for him while you're on this earth, then one day in the world to come, he will stand before the Father and he will say of you, that one belongs to me. Would you stand with me? As our prayer team comes forward, if you need prayer for anything at all, they would love to pray for you on the sides. But however God's asking you to respond, just respond today. Let me pray. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the truth that we can get out of this today. Thank you for the fact that it still changes lives today and you're still moving. Thank you that you've revealed so plainly and clearly who you are, your true identity. Thank you that you've revealed your mission, which was the cross followed by your resurrection. And thank you that you have shown us that what it looks like to follow you is so much more than simply believing. That it comes at a cost, and you lay that out. That it comes with denying ourselves. May we be a people who, as we follow you, we're willing to deny ourselves. We're willing to sacrifice for you. We're willing to go through pain for you. We're willing to serve others and not make it about ourselves. We're willing to humbly approach you on your throne, recognizing that you are the only one who deserves to be there, not just in the throne in heaven, but on the throne of our hearts, at the center of every area of our life. And for those in the room, including me, who can still pinpoint areas of our life where we have not made you the center, may we invite you in, because we want full surrender. May we be a people that as we leave this place today, we make a commitment to pick up our cross and follow you. Let's worship.